April 14th, 1945, 2100 hours. Forward observation post, Motobu Peninsula, northern Okinawa. First Lieutenant Robert Fowler pressed his field telephone receiver against his ear, listening to a sound that shouldn't exist this late in the war. The rhythmic chanting of hundreds, possibly thousands of Japanese voices echoing up from the valley below. Through the infrared scope, newly issued and still experimental, he watched formations assembling in the darkness. Grid 3, 5, 7, 2, 1, 8. Estimated 2,500 plus. They're forming up for something big. What Fowler was witnessing, and what Marine intelligence had predicted for 3 days, was the culmination of a tactical evolution that had taken the entire Pacific War to perfect. The Japanese weren't launching a spontaneous banzai charge driven by desperation and bushido. They were executing a carefully planned night assault, timed to exploit what they believed was American weakness, in darkness, coordinated with artillery preparation, and designed to break through Marine lines at their weakest point. The Imperial Japanese Army had finally learned to adapt their tactics. They had studied American defensive doctrine, identified vulnerabilities, and planned accordingly. It didn't matter. The United States Marine Corps had been waiting for exactly this moment, and they had prepared a reception that would demonstrate how completely modern firepower had evolved beyond anything the Japanese could counter. The mathematics of industrial warfare were about to be written in a new language. Not just the language of artillery coordination that had destroyed earlier banzai charges, but the integrated calculus of radar-directed fire, pre-registered kill zones, illumination munitions, and fire discipline so precise it could kill by the clock. The Japanese assault on the Motobu Peninsula represented the Imperial Army's most sophisticated tactical thinking of 1945. After catastrophic losses from frontal charges at Saipan, Guam, and Peleliu, Japanese commanders had developed new doctrine. Colonel Takehiko Udo, commanding the Japanese 2nd Infantry Unit on northern Okinawa, had spent 2 weeks planning this attack. His operations order, captured after the battle and preserved in Marine Corps archives, revealed careful analysis. American defenses strongest during daylight. Artillery response time averages 90 seconds from request to impact. Infantry vulnerable during reliefs and position changes. Illumination rounds create shadows exploitable by infiltration tactics. Udo had chosen the timing deliberately. 2100 hours, full darkness, when Marine infantry companies rotated positions for the night. His assault force, approximately 2,500 men from the 44th Independent Mixed Brigade, would advance in 3 waves. The first wave, 300 infiltrators with suppressed weapons, would neutralize forward observers and cut communication wires. The second wave, 1,000 assault troops, would exploit the gap. The third wave, 1,200 reserves, would reinforce success. Japanese artillery, carefully husbanded for weeks, would fire a 10-minute preparation barrage timed to lift just as the first wave reached Marine positions. It was the most sophisticated Japanese assault plan of the Okinawa campaign. Every lesson from 3 years of defeats had been incorporated. What Colonel Udo didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that the Marines had prepared for exactly this scenario. They had been preparing since Guadalcanal. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The United States Marine Corps approach to defensive warfare in 1945 represented the culmination of nearly 3 years of brutal education in the Pacific. At Guadalcanal in August 1942, Japanese night attacks had achieved tactical surprise. At Tarawa in November 1943, infiltration tactics had inflicted significant casualties. By April 1945, the Marines had transformed these painful lessons into defensive doctrine so comprehensive it anticipated every possible enemy action. Major General Lemuel Shepard, commanding the 6th Marine Division on Okinawa, had issued specific guidance for defending the Motobu Peninsula. His operations order, preserved in division records, reflected hard-won experience. All forward positions will maintain 50% alert during darkness. Observation posts will be established 500 yards forward of main defense line, with redundant communications. Artillery will pre-register on all likely avenues of approach. Illumination rounds will be prepared for immediate fire. All personnel will rehearse night defensive procedures until execution is automatic. The defensive preparation on Motobu revealed how far Marine Corps doctrine had evolved. Unlike earlier battles where defenses were improvised, the Motobu positions had been designed with scientific precision. Lieutenant Colonel Victor Bleasdale, commanding the 1st Battalion, 4th Marines, the unit that would face the main Japanese assault, had spent a week perfecting his defensive arrangement. His after-action report detailed the preparation. Every squad had assigned sectors with interlocking fields of fire. Machine guns were positioned for grazing fire at ankle height. Mortars were registered on dead spaces inaccessible to direct fire. Artillery forward observers had multiple firing positions connected by field, telephone, and radio. Every man knew exactly where to be and what to do when the attack came. The technical systems supporting this defense represented capabilities the Japanese simply didn't possess. The Americans had fielded the SCR-584 radar system, capable of detecting movement at ranges exceeding 5,000 yards. Colonel Edward Snedeker, commanding the 7th Marines, had positioned an SCR-584 on high ground overlooking the valley where Japanese forces were assembling. The radar operators could track large formations through complete darkness, providing early warning that gave defenders precious minutes to prepare. But the most revolutionary system was the integration of illumination with fire direction. Major Robert Hommel, commanding the artillery battalion supporting 1st Battalion 4th Marines, had developed a technique specifically for night defense. We calculated the exact altitude for illumination rounds to light up approaches without creating shadows where attackers could hide. Then we pre-registered high explosive on every illuminated area. When the illumination rounds went off, the attacking force would be frozen in perfect visibility with nowhere to hide. Within 30 seconds, high explosive would arrive. The Japanese would go from darkness to light to death without ever seeing our positions. This technique, called illumination destruction missions in Marine Corps parlance, required precise calculation. Illumination rounds had to be forced to burst at specific altitudes, typically 600 feet, to provide optimal lighting. High explosive rounds had to be calculated to arrive 30 to 60 seconds after illumination, giving forward observers time to adjust, but not enough time for attackers to take cover. The entire system depended on communication, calculation, and coordination executed with split-second timing. The Japanese had no comparable capability. Their artillery doctrine, still based on French methods from World War I, emphasized direct observation. Night fire was essentially impossible without pre-registered targets, and communication systems couldn't support the rapid-fire missions Americans executed routinely. A Japanese artillery battalion might manage one fire mission every 15 to 20 minutes. American battalions could execute continuous fire missions, shifting between targets in seconds. As Colonel Udo's forces assembled in the valley below Marine positions on the night of April 14th, they were preparing to assault a defensive system that existed decades beyond their tactical comprehension. The disparity wasn't just technological, it was doctrinal, organizational, and fundamentally philosophical about the nature of modern warfare. The Japanese still believed superior will and tactical skill could overcome material disadvantage. They were 3 hours away from discovering how completely wrong they were. Lieutenant Fowler, watching through his infrared scope from the forward observation post, continued his reports to the Battalion Fire Direction Center. Enemy forces forming in 3 distinct groups. Estimate first group 300, second group 1,000, third group 1,200. They appear to be conducting final briefings. Request permission to call preparatory fires. The response came immediately from Major Hommel at the Fire Direction Center. Negative. Let them commit fully. We want them all in the kill zone before we open fire. This represented a fundamental shift in Marine defensive doctrine. Earlier in the war, defenders would open fire immediately upon detecting enemy forces, hoping to disrupt their attack. By 1945, Marines had learned to wait. Let the enemy invest maximum forces in their assault, then destroy everything simultaneously. The Japanese plan called for artillery preparation beginning at 21:30 hours. At 21:25, Japanese guns opened fire 5 minutes early, possibly due to communication confusion. Approximately 60 rounds of 75mm and 105mm artillery struck Marine positions over 10 minutes. The barrage was heavy by Japanese standards, representing weeks of carefully hoarded ammunition. The effect on Marine positions was minimal. The defenders had constructed deep foxholes with overhead cover specifically designed to survive artillery. Casualties totaled 3 killed and 7 wounded from the preparatory barrage. The Japanese had expended irreplaceable ammunition to achieve virtually nothing. At 21:35, the barrage lifted. 300 Japanese infiltrators began moving forward through the darkness. They carried suppressed Nambu pistols, grenades, and wire cutters. Their mission was to penetrate Marine lines, undetected, cut communications, and neutralize forward observers. For the first 200 yards, they succeeded. Moving in small groups of 5 to 10 men, maintaining noise discipline, the infiltrators advanced through the broken terrain. Several groups actually passed between Marine positions undetected. Then they encountered the first innovation of Marine night defense: tripwires connected to illumination flares. Private First Class James Henderson, serving with Company A, 1st Battalion, 4th, Marines, had spent 2 days stringing tripwires across every likely infiltration route. The wires were set 6 inches above ground, invisible in darkness. When triggered, they activated handheld flares that would burn for 60 seconds with 50,000 candle power. At 21:42, a Japanese infiltrator triggered a tripwire. The flare ignited, turning night into day across a 100-yard radius. 30 Japanese soldiers were suddenly frozen in harsh white light, their faces showing shock and terror. They were caught in the open with no cover, perfectly visible to every Marine position in range. What happened next demonstrated the integration of Marine defensive fires. Within 3 seconds, every Marine machine gun within range opened fire. The M1919 Browning machine guns, positioned for interlocking fire, created a wall of bullets at ankle to waist height. The tracer rounds every 5th bullet created visible streams of fire that allowed gunners to walk their fire through the illuminated area. Simultaneously, 60mm mortars, organic to the rifle companies, began dropping rounds among the infiltrators. The mortars, already registered on the tripwire positions, fired without need for adjustment. The first wave of illumination flares revealed approximately 30 infiltrators. Within 90 seconds, all 30 were casualties. But the flares also revealed something more important. Behind the infiltrators, the main assault force was forming up just 500 yards away. Lieutenant Fowler immediately called the critical fire mission. Fire mission, grid 357218, enemy infantry in the open, estimated 1,000 plus. Request illumination destruction pattern alpha. Major Hommel's Fire Directions Center had been waiting for this exact call. Pattern alpha was a pre-planned fire mission, designed specifically for this situation. It would place illumination rounds over the enemy assembly area, hold them there for observation, then systematically destroy everything below with high explosive from multiple batteries. The execution was flawless. At 21:44, the first illumination rounds burst over the Japanese assault force. The 105mm shells, fused for altitude detonation, transformed night into artificial day. What the light revealed horrified both sides. Over 1,000 Japanese soldiers were formed in assault columns, clearly visible, frozen in the moment before their attack. The Marines could see individual faces, weapons, unit flags. The psychological impact on the Japanese was devastating. One moment they were hidden by darkness, the next they were exposed under brilliant light with American positions still invisible. They couldn't see their enemy, but their enemy could see them perfectly. Lieutenant Shiro Nakamura, one of 47 Japanese survivors from the assault, provided testimony after the war. The light was blinding. We couldn't see the American positions, only the light above us. Then we heard the sound, a shrieking in the sky growing louder. We knew what was coming, but there was nowhere to go. 30 seconds after the illumination rounds arrived, the first high-explosive shells impacted. Major Hommel had coordinated fire from 3 artillery battalions. The 1st Battalion, 15th Marines with 12 105mm howitzers. The 4th Battalion, 15th Marines with 12 105mm howitzers, and the 2nd Battalion, 10th Marines, also with 105mm howitzers, total 36 guns, all firing on the same target area. The Fire Direction Center had calculated the missions to create time on target impact. Despite being different distances from the target, all shells arrived simultaneously. Official Marine Corps records indicate that the initial barrage placed 108 rounds, 3 rounds per gun, into an area approximately 200 yards, by 300 yards, 90 seconds. The density was approximately 1 shell every 500 square yards. For soldiers caught in the open, survival was impossible. The official history of the 6th Marine Division describes the effect. The Japanese assault formation disintegrated under the barrage. Bodies were thrown through the air. The living tried to take cover, but there was none. Each illumination round lasted 60 seconds. Then another arrived to maintain continuous light. The high explosive continued falling without pause. Within 5 minutes, the assault force had ceased to exist as a coherent military unit. But Colonel Udo's plan included contingencies. As the main assault force died under American artillery, his third wave, the reserve of 1,200 men, was already moving to exploit what he believed would be gaps in American lines. They advanced through a different valley, attempting to bypass the kill zone where the second wave was being destroyed. The Marines were waiting there too. Corporal Robert Muller, serving as forward observer with Company C, 1st Battalion, 4th Marines, spotted the movement. His position, 500 yards forward of the main defense line, had been carefully chosen to observe multiple approach routes. Enemy infantry, grid 354-223. Estimate battalion strength moving northeast. They're trying to flank us. The call went to Major Hommel, who immediately shifted 1/3 of his artillery to the new target. This demonstrated perhaps the greatest American advantage, flexibility. The Fire Direction Center could coordinate multiple fire missions simultaneously, shifting between targets as needed. The Japanese, with their centralized, rigid command structure, couldn't adapt once a plan was in motion. Within 2 minutes, illumination rounds were burning over the third wave. Within 3 minutes, high explosive was falling. The reserve force, which had hoped to exploit success, instead found themselves in their own kill zone. The pattern repeated. Illumination revealing the target, high explosive, destroying it. Marines watching from concealed positions as artillery did the killing. As the slaughter continued, Colonel Udo made a fatal decision. He committed personally, leading a final group of 300 men, his headquarters staff and remaining reserves, in a desperate charge toward Marine positions. This was no longer tactical maneuvering. This was the old Japanese doctrine, the banzai charge that had failed so catastrophically throughout the war. But Udo was out of options. His carefully planned assault had disintegrated. His forces were dying in the kill zones. The only choice left was to die attacking rather than die waiting. At 22:15 hours, Udo's final group began their charge. They screamed the traditional battle cries, "Banzai! Tenno Heika Banzai! Long live the Emperor!" They came up the hill toward Company A's positions, bayonets fixed, swords raised. It was the exact scenario Marines had trained for. Captain Andrew Haldane, commanding Company A, 1st Battalion, 4th Marines, issued the order that had been drilled into every Marine: hold fire until 50 yards. Let them close, then kill everything. The approaching Japanese were silhouetted by illumination rounds still burning behind them. Marines waited in positions carefully prepared for exactly this moment. Machine guns were positioned for grazing fire. Riflemen had clear fields of fire. Grenades were stacked within easy reach. At 50 yards, Haldane gave the order. Fire. The Marine defensive position erupted. Every rifle, every machine gun, every automatic weapon opened fire simultaneously. The Marines were equipped with the M1 Garand, a semi-automatic rifle that could fire 8 rounds as fast as the trigger could be pulled. Each rifle squad had a Browning automatic rifle capable of sustained automatic fire. Each platoon had 3 machine guns. The volume of fire was overwhelming. The official Marine Corps history records what happened next. The attacking Japanese were hit by a wall of fire that stopped them, as if they had run into a physical barrier. The front rank fell. The second rank climbed over them and fell. The third rank fell on top of the second. Within 90 seconds, the charge had been completely stopped. No Japanese soldier reached within 30 yards of Marine positions. Colonel Udo died in this final charge, his body found later with his sword still in hand. His death marked the end of organized Japanese resistance on the Motobu Peninsula. By 22:30 hours, just 90 minutes after the attack began, it was over. The valley floor was carpeted with bodies. Japanese wounded called for help in the darkness. Small groups of survivors tried to retreat, but were caught by artillery as they moved. The Marines held their positions, alert for further attacks, but none came. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. As dawn broke on April 15th, 1945, the full scope of the carnage became visible. Marine patrols moved cautiously through the killing ground, counting bodies, searching for wounded, collecting intelligence. The official body count would take 2 days to complete. Final Japanese casualties killed in action, 2,463 confirmed dead. This number was verified through systematic counts by Graves registration teams. Wounded captured, 47. Most were too severely wounded to have escaped. Estimated escaped wounded, less than 100. Total Japanese assault force, approximately 2,500 men. Casualty rate, 98.6%. American casualties from 1st Battalion, 4th Marines, the unit that bore the brunt of the assault. Killed in action, 11. Wounded in action, 31. Total casualties, 42. The mathematics were stark. The Japanese had committed 2,500 men to a carefully planned assault. The Marines had killed or wounded 98.6% of them, while suffering 42 casualties themselves. The casualty exchange ratio was approximately 60-1. This wasn't war, as it had been understood for millennia. This was industrial-scale killing, where courage, training, and tactical skill meant nothing against systematic firepower. Major Hommel's artillery battalion had fired approximately 3,200 rounds during the 3-hour engagement. Breaking this down, 1,100 illumination rounds, 2,100 high-explosive rounds. The Fire Direction Center had coordinated these fires from 3 battalions across multiple target areas, sometimes simultaneously. The entire system had functioned exactly as designed, and the cost-effectiveness was calculated by Marine Corps logistics officers in reports preserved in the National Archives. Approximately 1.3 artillery rounds per Japanese casualty. At $25 per round, the cost was approximately $32 per enemy killed. This cold calculation revealed how completely warfare had been transformed. Killing had become an industrial process with cost-per-unit metrics. Lieutenant Colonel Bleasdale, commanding the battalion that defended against the assault, provided a more human assessment in his after-action report. The enemy attacked with considerable tactical sophistication for this stage of the war. They attempted infiltration, they timed their assault for maximum surprise, they tried to exploit what they believed were weak points in our defense. None of it mattered. Our fire support system destroyed them so completely they never had a realistic chance of success. This wasn't a battle. It was an execution. Among the captured documents was Colonel Udo's operations order, which revealed how much Japanese tactical thinking had evolved. The plan demonstrated understanding of American defensive procedures, appropriate timing, and reasonable tactical concepts. In an earlier era of warfare, it might have succeeded. Against the integrated firepower of a Marine division in 1945, it was doomed before it began. Captain Wataru Hiraoka, intelligence officer with the Japanese 2nd Infantry Unit, was one of the 47 survivors. His interrogation, conducted by Marine intelligence officers and preserved in division records, provided insight into Japanese perspective. We knew the Americans had superior firepower. We planned accordingly. The assault was timed for darkness when we believed their artillery would be less effective. We used infiltration tactics to penetrate their lines. We coordinated our artillery with our assault. By all the tactical principles we understood, the plan should have worked. What we didn't understand was that the Americans had developed an entirely new form of warfare. They could see in the dark. Their artillery could fire continuously without pause. Their communications allowed instant coordination, and most terrifying, they waited for us. They let us commit fully before they destroyed us. This wasn't tactical defeat. This was systematic annihilation. Hiraoka's testimony revealed the psychological impact of facing such overwhelming firepower. His assessment that the Americans had developed an entirely new form of warfare was accurate. The Marine Corps in 1945 represented the ultimate evolution of combined arms warfare. Every weapon system, every communication method, every tactical procedure had been refined through years of combat until execution was nearly automatic. The defensive battle on Motobu demonstrated capabilities the Japanese couldn't match. Radar detection allowed tracking enemy formations through complete darkness. Illumination munitions froze attackers in perfect visibility. Pre-registered fires eliminated calculation time. Time on target missions maximized impact. Redundant communications ensured continuity. Most importantly, fire discipline allowed defenders to wait until maximum effect before engaging. The contrast with Japanese capabilities was absolute. Japanese forces still relied on direct observation, limiting effectiveness in darkness. Their artillery doctrine didn't include illumination destruction missions. Communication systems couldn't support rapid-fire mission shifts. Centralized command structure prevented tactical flexibility, and cultural doctrine emphasized attack over defense, leaving them unprepared for sustained defensive operations. The battle illustrated a fundamental truth about modern warfare. Technology and organization had become more important than courage or tactical skill. The Japanese assault on Motobu incorporated lessons from 3 years of defeats, but lessons learned couldn't overcome capabilities they simply didn't possess. Major General Pedro del Valle, commanding the 1st Marine Division on Okinawa, analyzed the action in a letter to Marine Corps Commandant Alexander Vandergrift. The Japanese are learning, but they're learning lessons from a war we've already moved beyond. They've adapted to our tactics from 1943. We're fighting with doctrine from 1945. They're improving incrementally. We're improving exponentially. Unless they can match our industrial and technological capabilities, tactical improvements won't matter. The Motobu battle represented not just an American victory, but a Japanese impossibility. No amount of training, courage, or tactical sophistication could overcome the material and organizational disparity. The Japanese had prepared the best assault they could manage with available resources. It was utterly insufficient against what the Marines had prepared. In the aftermath, Marine intelligence officers conducted detailed analysis of Japanese casualties. The distribution revealed the effectiveness of different weapon systems. Artillery, approximately 72% of casualties. Small arms, approximately 23%. Mortars, approximately 5%. These percentages confirmed what Marines had learned throughout the Pacific War. Artillery was the primary killer in modern warfare. Infantry small arms, while necessary, were secondary to indirect fires. The Japanese, who still emphasized infantry tactics and close combat, had built their entire military doctrine around the least important aspect of modern battle: personal courage, individual marksmanship, skill with bayonets. All the virtues emphasized in Japanese training meant nothing when artillery could kill from miles away. The psychological impact on surviving Japanese forces was profound. News of the Motobu disaster spread rapidly through remaining Japanese units on Okinawa. The 32nd Army, commanded by Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima, received detailed reports of the failed assault. Ushijima had already rejected banzai charge tactics, but the Motobu disaster confirmed his defensive strategy. His chief of staff, Lieutenant General Isamu Cho, who had consistently advocated for offensive action, was finally silenced by the casualty figures. In war diary entries preserved in Japanese archives, Cho wrote, "The Americans have perfected the art of killing. Our soldiers no longer die in battle. They are processed through a killing system like raw material through a factory. Courage is irrelevant. Training is meaningless. We can only hide in caves and hope to sell our lives expensively when they come for us." This psychological defeat was almost as important as the physical casualties. Japanese commanders who still believed in offensive action were confronted with undeniable evidence of its futility. The Motobu assault had incorporated every lesson learned, every tactical improvement. It had been executed by well-trained troops under competent leadership, and it had been completely destroyed in 3 hours. For American forces, Motobu validated doctrine developed over 3 years of combat. The Marine Corps schools at Quantico would later use the battle as a case study in defensive operations. Every aspect of the defense, positioning, communications, fire planning, execution became part of standard training. Future Marine officers would study how 1st Battalion, 4th Marines had defended against odds of nearly 60 to 1 and inflicted a casualty exchange rate that was almost unbelievable. The Battle of Motobu also demonstrated the importance of intelligence and preparation. The Marines had known the attack was coming. Aerial reconnaissance had spotted Japanese forces concentrating. Radio intelligence had intercepted fragmentary communications. Most importantly, the Marines understood Japanese tactical doctrine well enough to predict exactly how they would attack. This intelligence allowed Major General Shepard to position forces precisely where needed, pre-register artillery on likely avenues of approach, and rehearse defensive procedures until execution was automatic. The Japanese, lacking comparable intelligence capabilities, attacked blind. They didn't know the Marines were waiting. They didn't know about the radar systems, the pre-registered fires, the illumination destruction missions. They walked into a killing ground that had been prepared specifically for them. The technical innovations demonstrated at Motobu would influence warfare for decades. Illumination munitions became standard in all armies. Pre-registered defensive fires became doctrine. Integration of radar with artillery fire direction became routine. The concept of letting enemies commit fully before engaging became accepted practice. In Korea 5 years later, American forces would use identical techniques against Chinese human wave attacks. At the Battle of Chipyeong-ni in February 1951, similar defensive preparations destroyed an entire Chinese division. The Chinese, like the Japanese before them, learned that courage couldn't overcome coordinated firepower. In Vietnam, American forces refined the techniques further, with better communications and helicopter-borne observers. The Gulf War in 1991 showcased GPS-guided munitions and computer fire direction. But the fundamental concept remained unchanged from Motobu: integrated firepower directed by forward observers, destroying massed formations. The personal experiences of Marines who fought at Motobu revealed the human dimension behind the statistics. Private First Class Eugene Sledge, serving with Company K, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, different unit but same division, later wrote about the aftermath of Japanese attacks. The worst part wasn't the fighting, it was the morning after. Walking through fields of bodies, most of them boys our age who died because their commanders sent them against firepower they couldn't possibly overcome. We didn't hate them by that point. We pitied them. They were brave, well-trained, and completely doomed. Sergeant Robert Leckie, serving with the 1st Marine Division, reflected on the transformation of warfare in his memoir. At Guadalcanal in 42, Japanese attacks terrified us. By Okinawa in 45, they were target practice, not because we became braver or better trained, though we did, but because our firepower became so overwhelming that Japanese courage was meaningless. We had turned killing into a science, and science always beats courage. The Japanese soldiers who died at Motobu deserved better than to be fed into American artillery, but their commanders, still trapped in outdated tactical thinking, sent them to certain death. The assault achieved nothing except to demonstrate that Japanese military doctrine had become completely obsolete. Captain Haldane, whose company had defended the main attack, wrote to his family, "We killed over 2,000 men tonight. They kept coming even when they knew they would die. I don't know whether to admire their courage or despair at their commander's stupidity. Probably both." This ambivalence was common among American veterans. They recognized the courage of their enemies while understanding the futility of that courage against modern firepower. The Japanese at Motobu had done everything their training and culture demanded. They had attacked bravely, maintained discipline, and fought to the death, and it had accomplished exactly nothing. The broader strategic context made the Motobu disaster even more tragic. By April 1945, Japan had already lost the war. American forces controlled the Philippines. B-29 bombers were destroying Japanese cities. The Navy had blockaded the home islands. Surrender was inevitable. Yet Japanese commanders continued sending men to die in attacks that couldn't possibly succeed. The Motobu assault killed 2,463 Japanese soldiers who could have defended the home islands when invasion came, or could have survived to rebuild Japan after surrender. Instead, they died achieving nothing in a battle that changed nothing. This futility haunted some Japanese survivors. Lieutenant Nakamura, one of the 47 who survived, later wrote, "We were told we would die gloriously for the Emperor. We died pointlessly for commanders who refused to accept reality. The Americans didn't defeat us at Motobu. We defeated ourselves by attacking a defense we couldn't break with weapons we didn't have." The aftermath of Motobu saw increased Japanese unwillingness to conduct offensive operations. General Ushijima, commanding on Okinawa, issued orders explicitly forbidding any more large-scale attacks. His forces would fight defensive battles from prepared positions, making Americans pay maximum cost for every yard. This defensive doctrine, while ultimately unsuccessful, at least made tactical sense. The offensive doctrine that led to Motobu was suicide masquerading as tactics. The final accounting of the Battle of Motobu reveals warfare transformed beyond recognition from even 20 years earlier. In World War I, armies would spend weeks planning major offensives, commit hundreds of thousands of men, and fight for months to capture miles of territory. At Motobu in 1945, 2,500 men were destroyed in 3 hours by a single battalion and its supporting arms. The time compression, firepower density, and casualty efficiency represented warfare at a new scale of lethality. What took weeks in 1918 took hours in 1945. What required army-level forces in World War I could be accomplished by a battalion in World War II. The evolution was exponential, and the Japanese never caught up. The Marines who fought at Motobu continued fighting for 6 more weeks before Okinawa was secured. Many would later participate in the planned invasion of Japan, which was ultimately made unnecessary by atomic weapons. The defensive techniques perfected at Motobu, illumination destruction missions, pre-registered fires, radar detection, integrated communications, became standard Marine Corps doctrine that would be tested again in Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. For the Japanese, Motobu was one more lesson learned too late. One more demonstration that their tactical doctrine was obsolete. One more proof that courage without technology was insufficient. By April 1945, These lessons no longer mattered. The war was lost. All that remained was the dying. As the sun rose fully on April 15th, graves registration teams continued their grim work. Chaplains moved among the dead, offering prayers for enemies and friends alike. Marines who had done the killing stood on their positions, exhausted, knowing the same scene would be repeated somewhere else, some other night, until Japan surrendered or was destroyed. Lieutenant Fowler, the forward observer who had called the first fire, a mission, wrote in his journal, "We killed 2,400 men tonight. They never had a chance. Our firepower was so superior they might as well have been charging with spears against machine guns. I suppose in a way they were. Their tactics and weapons were from a different era. They were fighting a war that ended 20 years ago. We were fighting a war from the future. The mathematics of Motobu were clear. Artillery, 3,200 rounds fired. Japanese casualties, 2,463 killed. American casualties, 42. Casualty exchange ratio, approximately 60-1. Time from first contact to conclusion, 3 hours. These numbers tell a story beyond mere statistics. They reveal the complete transformation of warfare into an industrial process where human courage, tactical skill, and personal valor had become subordinate to firepower, organization, and technology. The Japanese who died at Motobu were the last generation of warriors who believed spirit could overcome material. Their deaths proved conclusively that in modern warfare, courage is necessary but insufficient. Victory requires not just brave soldiers but superior systems, fire control systems, communication systems, industrial systems. The Americans possessed all of these. The Japanese possessed courage alone. At Motobu, as at Saipan before and countless battles across the Pacific, courage met coordination, spirit met system, tradition met technology, and technology won, every single time. The Japanese were annihilated at Motobu, not because they lacked courage or training or tactical skill. They possessed all of these in abundance. They were annihilated because they faced an enemy that had transformed warfare into mathematics, and the mathematics were against them from the moment they began their attack. 2,500 men marched into a valley on the night of April 14th, 1945. 47 marched out. The rest became statistics. In the greatest demonstration of modern firepower in the Pacific War, the Marines had waited for Japan's final charge, and they had annihilated it in 3 hours, not through superior courage, not through better training, but through superior firepower applied with industrial precision. The age of the warrior had ended. The age of coordinated killing had begun, and there was no going back. The Battle of Motobu Peninsula represented more than just another Japanese tactical defeat. It marked the culmination of a fundamental transformation in how wars were fought and won. The 2,500 Japanese soldiers who died in 3 hours on April 14th and 15th, 1945, were casualties not just of superior American firepower, but of a military revolution that had rendered their entire approach to warfare obsolete. In the weeks following Motobu, Marine Corps intelligence officers conducted extensive analysis of the battle. Their findings, preserved in classified reports that remained secret until 1973, revealed patterns that would influence military thinking for generations. Colonel Samuel Taxis, intelligence officer for the 6th Marine Division, wrote the most comprehensive assessment. The enemy demonstrated tactical sophistication unprecedented in our experience. The timing was appropriate, the infiltration tactics were sound, the coordination was competent. 20 years ago, this assault might have succeeded. 5 years ago, it would have inflicted serious casualties. In April 1945, it was doomed before it began. The disparity wasn't in courage, training, or tactical understanding. The disparity was in the fundamental nature of warfare itself. We have industrialized killing to a degree the Japanese cannot match. Their soldiers are warriors. Ours are technicians, operating a killing system. Warriors cannot defeat systems. This analysis captured a truth that many military professionals found uncomfortable. War had ceased to be primarily about human qualities like courage, endurance, or tactical skill. It had become about systems, logistics, industrial capacity, and technological sophistication. The human element remained necessary, but it was subordinate to the machines and systems that delivered firepower. The Japanese military establishment struggled to accept this reality even after Motobu. In Tokyo, Imperial General Headquarters received detailed reports of the disaster. Staff officers analyzed the casualty figures, the tactics employed, the reasons for failure. Their conclusions, documented in intercepted communications that American codebreakers read in real time, revealed a leadership still in denial about the true nature of modern warfare. The Motobu assault failed due to inadequate artillery support, insufficient infiltration forces, and premature commitment of reserves. Future attacks must incorporate additional artillery preparation, larger infiltration elements, and more. Flexible reserve employment. This analysis was technically accurate but strategically meaningless. Yes, more artillery would have helped. Yes, better infiltration might have achieved surprise. Yes, flexible reserves could have exploited opportunities, but none of these improvements would have changed the fundamental equation. The Marines possessed overwhelming firepower advantages that no tactical adjustments could overcome. Lieutenant General Cho, Chief of Staff of the 32nd Army on Okinawa, understood this better than most Japanese commanders. In his final communications before his death in June 1945, he wrote assessments that bordered on heresy by Japanese military standards. "We cannot defeat the Americans in offensive operations. Their firepower superiority is absolute. Their artillery can destroy formations before we close to effective range. Their illumination denies us the cover of darkness. Their communications allow instant coordination we cannot match. We can only fight defensively from prepared positions, making them pay maximum cost for every position. Even this will only delay the inevitable. We have no path to victory, only choices about how we die." Cho's assessment, while pessimistic, was accurate. By April 1945, Japan had no realistic hope of military victory. The strategic question wasn't whether Japan would lose, but how many would die before surrender came. The Motobu disaster killed 2,400 men who might have survived to rebuild Japan. It accomplished nothing except to demonstrate, once again, that Japanese offensive doctrine was suicide. The American perspective on Motobu revealed different concerns. While the tactical victory was complete and casualties were minimal, some officers worried about the psychological impact of such one-sided killing. Major Hommel, the artillery battalion commander whose fires had destroyed the Japanese assault, wrote privately to his wife, "We killed over 2,000 men tonight with artillery alone. The infantry barely fired their weapons. This doesn't feel like war. It feels like murder, even though they were trying to kill us." The efficiency of modern firepower has eliminated any pretense that combat is a test of warriors. It's become industrial slaughter. This discomfort with the nature of modern warfare appeared frequently in American veterans' accounts. They had been raised on stories of warfare where courage, skill, and determination mattered. They found themselves fighting a war where those qualities were secondary to firepower and logistics. Victory felt hollow when it came so easily, but neither personal discomfort nor moral qualms changed the fundamental reality. Modern warfare favored those who could deliver the most firepower with the greatest precision. The Americans could, the Japanese couldn't. Everything else was detail. The technical lessons from Motobu spread rapidly through Marine Corps and Army units. Within weeks, every division on Okinawa had incorporated Motobu's defensive techniques into their standard procedures. Illumination destruction missions became routine training. Pre-registered kill zones were established around every defensive position. Radar systems were integrated into fire direction procedures. The Marines had discovered a formula for defeating Japanese night attacks with minimal friendly casualties, and they intended to apply it everywhere. By May 1945, Japanese forces on Okinawa had essentially abandoned offensive operations. The last major attack came on May 4th, when elements of the Japanese 32nd Army launched coordinated assaults against American positions. The results mirrored Motobu. Approximately 5,000 Japanese soldiers attacked. Within 6 hours, 4,500 were dead. American casualties totaled 335. The kill ratio of 15-1 demonstrated that Motobu was not anomalous. It was the new normal. Japanese. Commanders finally accepted that offensive operations were futile. The remaining battles on Okinawa would be defensive, fought from caves and fortifications, designed to maximize American casualties rather than achieve victory. This represented the ultimate admission that Japanese military doctrine had failed. The offensive spirit that had animated Japanese tactics since the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 and 1905 had been systematically destroyed by American firepower. All that remained was the grim mathematics of attrition. The personal stories of Motobu survivors, both American and Japanese, revealed the human dimension behind the statistics. Staff Sergeant Mitchell Page, who had fought at Guadalcanal in 1942, where Japanese night attacks had terrorized Marines, served at Okinawa and witnessed the transformation. At Guadalcanal, when the Japanese attacked at night, we were scared. They seemed superhuman, coming out of the darkness screaming. By Okinawa, we had learned to see them as targets, not because they had changed, but because we had. Our firepower, our coordination, our systems had evolved to the point where their attacks were predictable and defeatable. We stopped being afraid and started being efficient. For the Japanese survivors, the experience was psychologically devastating. Lieutenant Nakamura, who had survived Motobu and was captured weeks later, provided extended testimony to American intelligence officers. The interrogation transcripts, preserved in national archives, reveal a man broken not by physical defeat, but by psychological impossibility. Everything we believed about warfare was wrong. We were taught that spirit could overcome material disadvantage, that superior will would defeat superior weapons, that the Japanese warrior tradition would triumph over American industrialism. Motobu proved all of this false. We attacked with courage, skill, and determination. We followed sound tactics. We coordinated our assault carefully, and we were slaughtered like animals by enemies we never even saw. This wasn't defeat in battle. This was erasure by system. Nakamura's testimony was shared among Allied intelligence services and later analyzed by military historians. His psychological breakdown mirrored the larger breakdown of Japanese military confidence. When fundamental beliefs about warfare prove false, soldiers lose not just battles but purpose. The Japanese military had built its entire identity around concepts that American firepower had rendered meaningless. Courage doesn't matter when artillery kills from beyond visual range. Training doesn't matter when illumination exposes every movement. Discipline doesn't matter when communications allow instant fire coordination. All the virtues Japanese military culture emphasized had become irrelevant in the face of American systems. The strategic implications of Motobu extended beyond the immediate battle. American military planners, preparing for the invasion of Japan, scheduled for November 1945, drew important conclusions from the casualty figures. If a single Marine battalion with supporting arms could destroy 2,500 attacking Japanese soldiers while suffering only 42 casualties, the invasion of Japan might be less costly than initially estimated. This optimism proved premature. The Japanese Homeland Defense Plan, Operation Ketsu-Go, called for 40 million civilians to resist invasion with bamboo spears and suicide tactics. But the Motobu casualty ratios did suggest that American firepower advantages might somewhat mitigate the horrific projected casualties. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 made invasion unnecessary, preventing what would have been the bloodiest campaign of the Pacific War. But the defensive techniques perfected at Motobu, the integration of radar, artillery, illumination, and fire discipline, became permanent features of American military doctrine. In Korea, Vietnam, and beyond, American forces would apply lessons learned at places like Motobu. Superior firepower, systematically applied, would remain the American way of war. For Japan, Motobu represented one more lesson in a 3-year curriculum of defeat. From Midway in June 1942 through Okinawa in June 1945, Japanese forces had been systematically outfought, outmaneuvered, and overwhelmed by American material superiority. Individual battles might be won through tactical brilliance or Japanese courage, but the strategic war was lost because Japan couldn't match American industrial capacity, technological innovation, or systematic organization. The warriors of the empire had fought bravely. The systems of American industry had defeated them comprehensively. In the decades after the war, veterans from both sides occasionally met to discuss their experiences. In 1975, 30 years after Motobu, a group of American and Japanese veterans gathered in Okinawa for a memorial ceremony. Among them was Lieutenant Nakamura, one of the 47 Japanese survivors, and Captain Haldane's executive officer, who had helped coordinate the defense. Their conversation, recorded by a Japanese documentary filmmaker, provided perspective impossible during the war. The American officer spoke first. "We admired your courage. You kept coming even when you knew you would die. We couldn't understand why your commanders sent you against firepower you couldn't overcome." Nakamura responded with the wisdom of 3 decades reflection. "We were trapped by our own traditions. Japanese military culture couldn't admit that warfare had changed. To acknowledge that courage was insufficient would have destroyed everything we believed about ourselves. So our commanders sent us to die, proving beliefs that were already obsolete. You won not because you were braver, but because you understood war had become about systems, rather than warriors." This exchange captured the fundamental tragedy of the Pacific War. Brave men died by the millions because their leaders couldn't adapt to changing realities. Japanese soldiers possessed courage, discipline, and training equal to any army in history. But these qualities couldn't overcome American advantages in firepower, logistics, and industrial capacity. The Battle of Motobu Peninsula stands as a monument to this tragic disparity. 2,500 Japanese soldiers attacked with everything their military culture valued: courage, discipline, tactical skill, willingness to die. And they were systematically destroyed by defenders who valued different things: firepower, coordination, systematic organization, efficient killing. Neither side was wrong about what they valued, but only one set of values won wars in the industrial age. The legacy of Motobu extended far beyond 1945. Military academies worldwide studied the battle as an example of defensive excellence. The techniques of illumination destruction missions, pre-registered fires, and integrated radar became standard curriculum. Future officers learned that modern warfare rewarded systematic preparation over spontaneous courage. The lesson has been repeatedly validated. In Korea, American firepower destroyed Chinese human wave attacks. In Vietnam, artillery and air support allowed small American units to defeat much larger enemy forces. In the Gulf War, precision weapons and systematic coordination demolished the Iraqi army in days. The formula discovered at places like Motobu, superior firepower applied with systematic precision, has dominated warfare for 80 years. The human cost of this transformation is measured in millions of lives. The Japanese soldiers who died at Motobu, Saipan, Okinawa, and countless other battles were casualties not just of American firepower, but of their own military culture's inability to adapt. They died bravely, following orders, maintaining discipline, exhibiting all the warrior virtues their culture celebrated. And it meant nothing against enemies who had transformed warfare into mathematics. The tragedy of Motobu isn't that Japanese soldiers lacked courage. It's that courage alone was insufficient, and their commanders sent them to die, proving a point that had already been disproven 1,000 times before. As the sun set on April 15th, 1945, Marines on Motobu Peninsula looked out over the valley, where 2,400 men had died. The bodies would be buried in mass graves. The wounded would be treated and imprisoned. The survivors would carry trauma for the rest of their lives, and the lessons would be learned, recorded, and transmitted to future generations of warriors who would face different enemies with the same fundamental truth. In modern warfare, courage is necessary but insufficient. Victory requires superior systems, applied with industrial precision. The Japanese who died at Motobu deserved better than to be fed into the machinery of American firepower, but they had been commanded by officers who refused to accept that warfare had changed, who valued death with honor over survival with adaptation, who sent thousands to die, proving beliefs that American artillery had already disproven. Their courage was real, their sacrifice was genuine, their deaths were meaningless, and that, more than the casualty figures or tactical details, is the true lesson of the Battle of Motobu Peninsula. When warfare transforms, those who fail to adapt don't just lose battles, they lose entire generations to proving beliefs that are already obsolete. The mathematics of Motobu were written in blood across a valley in northern Okinawa. 2,500 attacked, 47 survived. The equation was simple, brutal, and definitive. Courage met coordination. Spirit met system. Warriors met technicians operating a killing machine. And the outcome was never in doubt. Not from the moment the first illumination rounds burst over Japanese formations. Not from the first artillery shells that began falling with mathematical precision. Not from the first marine machine gun that opened fire with interlocking fields of fire calculated to kill everything in the kill zone. The Japanese at Motobu never had a chance. They were brave, well-trained, and completely doomed from the moment they began their attack. This is the final lesson of Motobu, and of the Pacific War itself. Modern warfare doesn't reward courage, training, or tactical brilliance. It rewards industrial capacity, technological sophistication, and systematic organization. The side that can deliver more firepower with greater precision wins. Everything else is detail. The Japanese learned this lesson at Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Guam, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and 1,000 smaller battles across the Pacific. They learned it again at Motobu, where 2,500 men died in 3 hours to prove, once more, what had already been proven countless times before. Courage alone is not enough. Spirit cannot overcome steel. Warriors cannot defeat systems. And in the end, the age of the warrior died with them, killed by artillery fire, illumination rounds, and American Marines who had perfected the art of systematic killing. The final irony of Motobu is that the Japanese attacked seeking glorious death in battle, the ultimate expression of Japanese warrior culture. They received instead systematic slaughter by an enemy that viewed killing as an industrial process to be optimized for efficiency. They wanted death with meaning. They received death as statistic. They sought the glorious last charge of the samurai tradition. They got 3,000 artillery rounds calculated to kill with mathematical precision. The Americans gave the Japanese exactly what they claimed to want: death in battle. But they gave it to them in a way that stripped away all the glory, all the honor, all the meaning. Death at Motobu wasn't glorious. It was efficient, and that efficiency, more than any single factor, defined the American way of war that won the Pacific and would shape global conflict for generations to come. The warriors of Imperial Japan died at Motobu, proving that the age of warriors had ended. They were replaced by technicians who delivered firepower with the efficiency of an assembly line, and there was no going back. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.